celebrate than with you, our loyal listener. We will be giving away 8,700 Rand to 10 lucky listeners during the month of August. To stand a chance of winning, stay tuned to SAfm and SMS the keyword SAfm 87 followed by your name to 41391 and listen to the station throughout the day where you can be selected a winner. SMSs are charged at R1.50 per SMS. Free SMSs and SMS bundles do not apply. Terms and conditions apply. Bridget Masinga on SAfm.
There is fire on the mountain, and nobody seems to be on the run. Oh, there is fire on the mountain top, and no one is running. I wake up in the morning.
So there's actual logic to it.
Tell me what I see on my TV screen. I see the blood of an innocent child, and everybody's watching. Now I'm looking out my window, and what do I see?
So there's logic to the madness.
I see an army of a soldier man marching across the street. Hey. What did it say to make you so blind to your conscience and reason? Could it be love for your country or for the gun you use in killing? So there is fire on the mountain.
Hi there, hello.
Oh, there is fire on the mountain.
Can you hear me? I'm speaking really, really loudly.
Yeah, and you shouldn't need to do that.
Hello?
Hello.
Can I give you 10 what?
10 words at least.
Good afternoon, my name is Mandi Sankwanyana and I'm awesome.
Yes, you are.
So little Lucy turned 16, and like the movie she's been seeing, she has a lover in her daddy. She can't tell nobody till she makes the evening news. For there is fire on the mountain, and nobody seems to be on the run. Oh, there is fire on the mountain top, and no one is surrounding. Oh, yes.
All of my
One day the river will overflow, and there'll be nowhere for us to go, and we will run, wishing we had put out the fire. Oh, Lord, for there is fire on the mountain, yeah, and there ain't nobody. Oh, there is fire on the mountain, and no one is running. So yeah, there is fire in Africa. Oh, there is fire everywhere in the sea.
Bridget Masinga is leading the conversation all across South Africa right now. Stay tuned to SAfm.
It is indeed the full circle with myself, Bridget Masinga, on SAfm. In the midst of August, Women's Month it is. And we thought, what better way to commemorate the month, to celebrate the month, than to convene downstairs at SABC a panel of fabulous women. And these are really young, innovative thought leaders, captains of industry, in conversation around what does it mean What does it mean to inhibit space? What does it mean to be women? What does it mean to face some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis? Coming up on 30 years since democratic South Africa, and perhaps approaching one of the most important elections that our country has ever seen since 1994. There is no better time than right now for women to be in conversation about the role that they've played not only in South African history, not only in liberating the country, but also in the economics of the country, in the social development of the country across various sectors and spaces. Oftentimes, we talk around the Global Gender Gap Index, and what does that mean? Well, some of the key areas of focus are around health, education, and of course, economic participation and political empowerment. But in practice, as women, in our lived experience on a day-to-day, do we actually reap the rewards of all the energy that we plow into our different ecosystems? We'll find out in the next 2 hours. And of course, I will be joined by phenomenal female guests as the show proceeds. I'm Bridget Masinga. This is The Full Circle on SAfm, leading the conversation.
Mama Kitty, I heard Rand Water talking on the radio about how dangerous it is for people to encroach on their pipeline servitude.
Yes, those high-pressure Rand Water pipelines are under the ground distributing megaliters of water. When people build on top of the pipeline, Rand Water is unable to conduct maintenance on the pipeline, which has a negative impact on water provision. Pipelines can burst without warning. People could get seriously injured or worse.
Yes, people can die from a bursting pipe. That is why people need to understand that Rand Water servitude is where a Rand Water pipeline is located. If we build our houses or businesses on a Rand Water servitude, then we are encroaching on that servitude. They say if communities want to know whether they've encroached over servitudes, they should look for the Rand Water beacons.
The beacons indicate the presence of Rand Water pipelines under the ground. They're rectangular, made of concrete, are painted either white or blue, and have the Rand Water logo on them.
Let's take a walk around our area to see if there are any Rand Water beacons so that we can also tell the neighbors.
Rand Water, celebrating 120 years of existence and still finding new ways to provide clean, portable bulk water.
Saturdays at 4 p.m. are all about the young ones on SABC2. So, beat the cold, because we have all the reasons why you should stay indoors. On the 5th and 12th August, catch the Diary of a Wimpy Kid franchise. On the 19th and 26th of August, step into a world of wonder with The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Chronicles of Narnia, Voyage to the Dawn Trader, only on SABC2.
SAfm is celebrating its 87th birthday, and what better way to celebrate than with you, our loyal listener. We will be giving away 8,700 Rand to 10 lucky listeners during the month of August. To stand a chance of winning, stay tuned to SAfm and SMS the keyword SAfm87, followed by your name to 41391, and listen to the station throughout the day, where you can be selected a winner. SMSs are charged at R1.50 per SMS. Free SMSs and SMS bundles do not apply. Terms and conditions apply. This is Bridget Masinga on SAfm.
It is indeed the full circle with myself, Bridget Masinga, on this very fine Tuesday, as we gather as women in South Africa and, of course, all over, just in conversation. I think there's no better time to be a woman than it is right now. And before I go any further, let me just introduce the two phenomenal ladies that are joining me today. Kopano Cohen, who needs no introduction on the show, a television executive with credentials as long as my arm, as well.
I feel like you're aging me.
It's a testament to how hard you've worked and how far you've come in a short space of time, right? Which
Yes,
really taps
absolutely.
into our conversation today. Absolutely.
Yes, and thank you for that amazing introduction.
I mean, come on. And then we've Kwanyana also joining me today, and Mandisa is the founder of Rubik's Media. You've been in the media, entertainment, broadcasting game for a very long time. You've watched it go through its ups and its downs, so you've got a very interesting perspective in as far as the space that women occupy in this particular sector. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm
And
fantastic.
I've been here for a very long time, for almost as long as you've been in radio.
Yep. A very long time. So, ladies, let's get into it. And I think because, and we're going to be joined, by the way, Kilebogile Muloko, let me not forget you, who is a founder and chief investment officer at Prowess Investments. She's going to be joining us remotely. Kilebogile, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am fantastic. We appreciate the time that you've taken to be in conversation with us today. And I think let's start here. I alluded to it, in the intro. It is almost 30 years post-democracy in South Africa. We're approaching what is going to be considered probably one of our most important elections since 1994. There's been a significant role that was played by women in the liberation of this country, in the politics of this country. But when we take stock 30 years later, is that significance really recognized in the way that it should? Is that significance, that role seen in significant ways in the positions that women occupy, in leadership, in political spaces, and are their voices being heard? Let me start with you, Gopan.
I think it's quite apt that you should raise that question. And obviously, and I'm glad we'll have somebody who can speak on behalf of the corporate kind of industry, because I think as creatives who are in the space, we know the gaps that are there for women. But I think the problem and the big issue, the overarching issue for women, especially on the continent, remains the fact that the face of poverty on the African continent is female. And, as much as we're making strides towards that, you hear respective governments all over Africa trying to make that work and move forward. The face of poverty in Africa is still a black woman. And if we begin with that, then we go into issues of GBV. We go into issues of education and how the female child is impacted by just her menstrual cycle every month.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of unpack issues about, if you look today, we've got a live crew here, representation and women in production, right? The other day I was on a set and we have problems, first of all, in the film and whatever industry regarding black representation, but female representation is still an issue. We can actually count the number of women who are here. How many female camera people, how many DOPs do you know who are female? And so the struggle continues for us as creatives in that space.
Yeah. Mandisa?
I think for me, and I'm glad you touched on the political side of the challenges that we face as women in industry across different sectors, is even though there's legislative frameworks, there's stimulus packages that governments create, there's still a challenge from corporate trying to meet us halfway with all those interventions that the government does on our behalf. And I think there's also a greater onus on us as women to also push further in getting access to these opportunities. A case in point, in South Africa, and you mentioning that we are 30 years into democracy, but we are 3 years into the minimum 40% that should be set aside for women. How many of us even have 1% of it? So I think it's important to, one, be aware of what is available, but also it's very important for the public sector and the private sector to work very closely together with us to make sure that we, one, get our own autonomy and we get our own agency in the spaces that we occupy. We also can't take out of the equation that till this day there are certain jobs or industries that even a girl child believes she doesn't belong in. Part of it is social, but part of it is because of barriers she's seen other women walking ahead of her in that particular industry that has made it difficult for that senior woman to grow and flourish. So it's also being able to create safe spaces for women to enter into industries that are predominantly male-dominated. It's important for corporates. For example, I make an example in the mining industry. Just recently, people have started creating PPE for women in mining. There's been women working in the mining industry for eons, but only recently do we realize that we need PPE that is suitable for a female informal form. So I think it's very important that the conversation spreads across industries, across sectors, both public and private sector. But very importantly, we are at the forefront of that conversation. 1956, no one did that fight for us. We can't sit on our laurels and hope that all these tick boxes will just magically open doors. So it's important to constantly push the envelope, knock on those doors, and not be afraid to speak up.
Kilebogile?
Yeah, I think, I started in the financial services industry 27 years ago, born in a rural area, and I experienced different types of lifestyles, right, until I was privileged to be in the industry. And I think, Kopano, you find it just around the issue of poverty. So when I look at what our issues are in South Africa, whether I'm looking at the gender lens perspective, or if I'm looking at transforming, the landscape for each citizen from an economic and financial perspective, for me, the biggest issue is economic inclusion. Some of the issues that we talk about in terms of gender gaps, access to education, or even being included in the workspace and so forth, is that we need to ensure that there is a collaborative effort, not only from government in terms of legislation, but also from the corporate South Africa in terms of implementation, that we actually are explicit, intentional about creating opportunities for women to access economic opportunities. And within that context is also meaning that you're not only looking at scorecards to say, okay, fine, maybe I've got 30% of my workforce that is female. You also need to actually be intentional about saying, are they actually paid the same rate that male counterparts are actually paying? Because then you find that the economic disadvantage for women is a pay gap parity, right? Which we very much are aware of. And then second, women tend to live longer than men as well. So you're disadvantaged in terms of pay parity, but then you've got a much longer lifespan to actually face. So when I look at corporate South Africa, I'll talk about the financial services industry. I mean, when we look at maybe 30 years, and we reflect, has there been progress? The answer is definitely we've seen progress, but the pace of progress is very, very, very slow. And we have become complacent, I think, as corporate South Africa, in terms of really partnering with government to make sure that we implement, we measure what we have implemented, and we also test the targets that we have put forward, right? You can hear, some companies might target 25% to 30%, 35% women inclusion, might be 40%, but you also need to look at the context of what is the population of women in South Africa. It's just around just above 51%. So we need to really stretch those targets, measure them, and then also be transparent in terms of reporting, and finally be rigorous in terms of mandatory compliance. Because then if you're not gonna insist on compliance or you put regulation, what we have learned in the last 30 years, if we look at BEE, is that a lot of companies will only choose to implement if it suits them in terms of the bottom line, but not because it is the right business strategy to implement.
Yeah. Tell me this, ladies, we've sort of touched on inclusion, representation, gender pay parity, which we'll get into a little bit. But, the other day I was having a conversation with my colleague Kathy, and we were looking at the coalition talks that just happened last weekend. The visuals that came out of there. We questioned that a lot, and that's a conversation that Kathy's going to delve a little bit deeper into as well, in terms of when it comes to seeking all these things, right? The message is disseminated from the top down, but visually the people that are steering the country are all male. In the most significant way, the seat of authority and power is male in this country. And there's been no real significant shift. Yes, people talk about we have, equal male-female representation in our parties. Yes, we have 40%. But there's been no real significant shift in that people will go, how many democratic elections later, and we don't have a female candidate running post Mampumzile.
Yep. And, I was actually watching those optics because optics matter, right? It was the so-called moonshot pact, or whatever they were planning to sign, which to me, it's so problematic on so many levels politically. But yes, the face of leadership, the face of power in South Africa remains very much male. And, I think also as we unpack issues around the gender gap, and we'll talk about the pay gap, which makes me very agitated, right? Because we know that women take care of children and we know that there are so many female-headed households. But the thing is, they can't even hide the optics, right? And actually, if somebody in that sort of organizing committee, and this is what I was thinking to myself, had thought about the optics of this, perhaps they might have tried to even make a plan about it. But people don't even think about, what will it look like that everybody representing this thing is male? And, so it's so bad that people don't think about the optics. That's the thing that got me, And so, and then obviously as you unpack questions around being female, you also unpack issues around being black and female, right? So you there's this pecking order between these people and then us right there. And my problem has been, and I'm glad you mentioned the politics and the fact that we haven't had a female sort of person who could run for president here in our country, is that many times the female organizations, and I'm not going to mention the name, but I think there's only one real female organization in politics whose voice we sometimes hear, doesn't always say the right things regarding women's rights. And at times, male perpetrators of certain crimes are protected by those very same people. And that is one of the big problems I have with political female leadership.
Let's hold it there for a second. We'll double back to that question because I think Mandy's is itching to say something. But we've got Dineo standing by with the headline news.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Good afternoon. Let's take a look at the headlines at 1:30. The NPA says they'll continue working on the Babita Deokaran case in order to nab the kingpin that ordered the hit on the life of the corruption whistleblower. In a separate court matter, the family of murdered Bond University student Lee Matthews says they don't believe her killer, Donovan Moodley, has been rehabilitated. They were speaking through their legal team in the High Court in Johannesburg, where Moodley's parole review application was postponed to the end of this month. And President Cyril Ramaphosa has vowed to use the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to the country to level two-way trade between the two countries. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
You're listening to Bridget Masinga on SAfm.
It is the full circle with myself, Bridget Masinga, and of course, if you are watching our dialogue via the live stream, you would have noticed that we've been joined by another guest today. Ntsako Mkabela is a theatre writer, director, producer. She's a woman who inhabits the theatre space, and of course, Kopano Cohen is still with us in conversation, also television executive and content generator, as well as Mandisa Mkwanyana, who's the founder of Rubik's Media. She is in the media entertainment space. And of course, we have got Kilebukhile Moloko, who is the founder and chief investment officer at Prowess Investments, joining us via Skype. And that's the thing. Optics matter. To the point we were saying leading into the headlines. Optics matter, and sometimes we don't consider that. And I think optics speak volumes about what you are doing. I have issues with this phrase that is often used by leaders to say, you must be seen to be. And I'm like, no. If you studied English, that says a lot. You must be. You must not be seen to be. Because seen to be, you putting pretty little lace and pretty little flowers on things and decorating it, but are you authentically, realistically, actually doing what you were supposed to be doing? And in this case, are you really putting women in a position or allowing a landscape where women can ascend to significant positions of leadership and power?
You said I was itching before the break. I have a slightly differing view. And this is specifically in the context of politics. We've seen a lot of conferences broadcast on television. And it's the same women that don't vote us into power. We are in those spaces. We have agency in those spaces. We have voices in those spaces. But when it comes to putting Bridget's name forward, we'd rather choose our male counterparts. And for me, it's a deeper question on the socialization of us as people, the socialization of us as Africans. A lot of women still view life through a patriarchal lens. We are still the ones that push patriarchy in politics, in homes, in churches. The spectrum is wide. So when it comes to the context of us being in positions of power, us being able to lead nations, lead organizations, we need to trust us as women. We need to trust that we can lead. But if we don't trust that Bridget can be the president of the country, and no pun intended, if we don't trust us as women that she can represent us and our needs, then we're still going to be in the same conundrum. Because in as much as optics matter, you don't want to be the fronter. You don't want to front for the political party to make it seem like they are pro-woman, but at the core and at the essence of the way they do things, the way they operate, we are bottom of the barrel. So even in terms of how organizations are formed, transformation, diversity, equity should be in your DNA, not just what we see on the screens.
And Ntako, let me jump you in here as you find your pace in this conversation. But from your perspective, you know, are we lacking in leadership? Is this even a fair question to ask, whether it's a lack in female leadership? Perhaps some might argue to what Mandisa is saying. Some might go, well, you know, I don't see a woman that can ascend and rise to that position.
No, no, that would be nonsensical. I think that South Africa...
Can we get sound on Ntako's mic?
On?
Is it on? Okay, let's try again. Yes.
Well, no, I think that South Africa as a country is a country where the majority of households are run by women.
Yeah.
The majority of institutions, social institutions that hold things together are run by women. I think that women are often given the job of carrying and not the job of being seen as the leader, the job that has power, that is recognized, or power that is seen as legitimate. So where they need someone to make sure that the drug problem in the townships is under control, you'll find that a lot of women put themselves on the front line in that. Where HIV/AIDS is a crisis, how many care workers are women who carry the work of caring, who carry the work of making sure that people don't get lost? And yet when you say who can lead, they then say, well, surely your hands are too dirty, Makumalo, you couldn't possibly. And so, I mean, we are doing the work of leading spiritually. We're doing the work of leading in the home. We're doing the work of actually making sure that people don't get lost. And kind of covering the losses that don't come out of having women as part of your leadership structures. So no, I don't think we have a failure of women leaders. I think, as you so rightly said, is that the patriarchy lives and it is strong. And it is true that sometimes the face of women is used to represent the patriarchy. And so sometimes people will say nonsensical things like, oh, women don't like women. And I'm like, please. When there's a death, who do people put around themselves first in the home? You will find women sitting on the floor with you. Yeah. When there is a wedding, usually, it's women. I often say, where are our men when we're doing the things of living our lives? And so, no, we don't have a failure of leadership. We don't have women who are invisible. We just have spaces where power exists that don't want to have women be part of those conversations, I think.
Kilebogile, what do we do then? Approaching 2024 with a leadership vacuum and a trust deficit, what do women do to occupy this space in more profound ways?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on this conversation, and I'm just going to use my experience in the financial services industry. When I started Prowess, I was maybe one of the few Black woman-owned and run investment management company in a men's world, right? And it was difficult. I mean, all of the stereotypes that you can think about, and the discrimination or people thinking that you're not good enough and so forth. But when I look at what we've achieved since then, we have a lot more women-owned companies within investment management. But it took having clarity as women in the industry in terms of who we are, what we stand for, and what we want to see change, right? And you need to start occupying by letting your voice be heard. So, I mean, it starts, some of the younger generation, they will ask me, how do I actually make an impact? And I say, you know what, speak your mind, be counted at the table, engage at every opportunity that you find in terms of the structures that exist within your company, at management level, at board level. Be proactive around what the shift needs to be and what it looks like. So it means that we need to raise more awareness, because if we're not going to do it for ourselves as women, or even one woman in one organization, the men are not going to do it for us. The woman exists, the skilled labor is there, the value add is there, diversity of ideas and innovation is there, but we need to really be heard, and we are the ones that need to take on that leadership. I think secondly, it's around collaboration. So what we've done in our industry, and I'm not saying that it's effective, but it's also shifted the dial for us. It is knowing who are the other women in the industry that maybe sit in key decision-making positions within their own organization, or even in terms of institutions that are available within an industry where dialogue can actually take place, and start influencing and advocating from that perspective. And also engage government, led institutions that care about implementing the same, goals, which is gender inclusion. So you need to be very proactive in terms of stakeholder engagement within your sphere of influence, connect with other women, be vocal, and also see it as a long-term goal. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So, so you need to kind of think about that it has to be intergenerational. So as an older woman in the industry, I have my own, group of women that I'm talking to about these issues, and raising the awareness of why it's important, and handing the baton so that, if I'm out of the industry or something has to happen, progress is also being made. But as I said, given our experience, I think really regulation, legislation, reporting, and maybe even going to penalties for corporate South Africa might be, a more stringent measure that needs to be considered for us to make strides in this issue.
Kilebogile mentioned something, and it goes back to the conversation we were having privately in studio about what is it about, and funny, it was one of our male producers asked this question. He said, without insulting women, but I'm just trying to find out, what is it about this particular generation of women that prohibits them from galvanizing? And he used the woman of 70 or 56 and said, They moved. They got together in the kitchens, in the Stokvels, in the societies, and they moved as one singular unit with one singular voice. Even went so far as to bring up an example in the UK around how women rallied around each other in order to unionize for themselves. We couldn't give him an answer. We were like, well, we kind of know what you're saying because we have these conversations. But as Kilebogile just said, clarity of who we are in order to unify for a singular thing at a singular time.
So, couple of things there that I find interesting. You know, I'm busy reading that Year of Yes book by Shonda Rhimes again, where she mentions being a first only black FOB. And wow, you know, there's so many, because I consume a lot of media, obviously, because it's what we do. People out there publicizing first female this and first female that. And it always grates me because I'm like, if you're sitting somewhere on a board and you're not bringing women along with you because you want to be a first only, that is a big issue that we need to address. But I think to speak to your issue about why women don't galvanize, we have a lot that we are dealing with, girl, individually. I'm going to tell you now. Young girls are getting pregnant between the ages of 10 and 19.
Yeah.
HIV persists. Poverty. Girls right now in the township that are falling prey to the scourge of drugs. Women are dealing with a lot individually. And I'm not saying that does not mean we cannot galvanize. But our struggles are keeping us occupied, I think, girl. And at some point, once we've dealt with these things, you know, if you don't have a 10-year-old pregnant child, you're not thinking about galvanizing anything. You're thinking about surviving. And I think it is the problem. It is the issue of many black women that survival is the goal. They are not sitting there strategizing about things because they need to eat, okay? But I think there's small things we can do. For example, I was talking to a friend of mine about how we treat our domestic workers, right? Woman to woman as black women.
Yeah.
And beginning with those kinds of conversations about if you have someone in your house who's female, who's helping you raise your kids, how are you helping to empower that woman, right? We can do this one-to-one on the daily. How are you treating fellow women in your wake? As somebody who's been in TV for a very long time, I am very obsessed, in fact, about empowering women to come into the space, not just as producers, because there's this weird thing about producers are female, directors are male. That, like, yeah, and how, you know, how the director of Barbie is now being lauded as one of an actual important director in Hollywood. Women can direct, women can DOP, women can camera, women can do all of it. And I think if I, on the daily, make that a point, that every woman I meet who's in my space, what can I do to assist, empower, uplift? That might be a good starting point. But I think the problem we're having is we're busy. Mental health is an issue. I'm diagnosed with bipolar 2, open about it. Many women are going through postnatal depression, not talking about it. There's a friend of mine who works in a corporate who doesn't have a space to pump milk when she came back to the office. She's doing it in the bathroom. Now that woman is not going to galvanize anything. We are so busy and so much is upon us that I think we actually have to figure out alternative ways, but also start to think about that, what you just asked, because I think we're so busy not thinking about it that we're not creating space for it.
Nsako?
I mean, I think it's really important to recognize women in different spaces, right? Yes, there is where is the public social visibility of women? But the truth is that every time women say women, how many times do we get told, don't forget boy children, don't forget this and the other, right? We live in a time where it's almost seen as though it's becoming taboo for women to stand together and say we stand because we're women and because we as women have these things that keep us not oppressed, but the patriarchy is real, and part of how it lives is by pretending it doesn't exist. And so in as much as we're busy, we kind of also somewhat feel schizophrenic because you feel that you're not invited to the boys only clubs. You know it. And when you say, how come we don't get invited? They say, well, girl, you don't have the time. I mean, we meet at 6 o'clock. And you're like, wait, who's feeding my children at 6 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
Where even the fathers of those children feel free to be there at 6 o'clock and not be home at that time. So I think that part of it, of how invasive this system is that it pretends it doesn't exist. It pretends when there's 50% of women in the space, that means that you've got 50% of women's voices, realities represented in those spaces. But that doesn't, I mean, that's not true. And half the world is at this moment arguing what a woman is. So a lot of women, I mean, I kind of watch with a lot of humor all these debates where people say, what is a woman right now? And everybody's like, I don't know. And you're like, well, how on earth am I ever going to organize a women's march when I live in a time when I cannot even articulate that I exist? right? As I am and in my reality. The other thing also is that there's a lot of private things that don't get seen between women that exist, that are so powerful and beautiful, and that get overshadowed by narratives of like girl on girl, girls don't raise girls. But I raise my girls. The girls that I work with in my office, I make sure that they have a space, they have a voice. The ladies are clean. I say, Sissy, I see you are cleaning, but are you still studying? Are you still doing your things, right? And also, I am held up by my girlfriends, to be honest. My girlfriends, my sisters, my aunties, my rakhadis. I mean, I don't want to overstate this thing of kind of placing women in domestic spaces, but I'm placing us in private spaces. To say that in those spaces where we are busy, I co-parent with my best friend. You know what I mean? And so if you do not see those spaces, it is easy to begin to not recognize how important they are to our sanity, to our spirituality, and to the fact that whilst the world is pretending the thing we say exists doesn't exist, my girlfriends will come and be like, yo, your boss. This is the real thing. This is the real. And, you know, all of these things are seen like, it's wine conversations. But these are not wine conversations. These are not just girls at a Stockville conversations. These are the things that are keeping us sane, literally.
Yeah.
And if you don't see them, you may think they don't exist. And so we begin to hear this narrative that these things don't exist and they're not important, but they very much do exist. And I want every woman who wants to say that women don't love each other, I'm sure you can name more women in your life who are holding you up than women who are, yes, is that crazy woman at the job. I encourage more women to seek therapy. We live in a world of GBV, which means that there's a lot of battered women. Seek therapy and don't take it to the job. Don't take it out on other people. But in truth, more of us hold each other up than we actually tear each other down, I think.
I love that concept of sort of each one bring one type vibes, because then it's the rippling effect of it. If 39 million of us did it, it's 39 million more. Yeah?
I think for me, Bridget, when I started my business 5-6 years ago, I found myself as the lone media girl in an agency world full of male-dominated agencies. So I want to touch on the issue of galvanizing. My first port of call was to find other women in business. Find a circle, a tribe, a network of people that, one, I can relate to, people that have walked the journey before me, and people that can assist me in this circle that I'm in. Beyond that, and I hear you ladies, that there's a lot we're dealing with as women, as mothers, as friends, as just women in society. But I think the key difference between what we face now versus 1956, they had one collective mission, held by one collective voice for freedom, for freedom of movement. So if your struggles don't look like mine, we feel that that's your problem. I don't have to galvanize with you. I don't have GBB in my home. It's not my problem. But at a fundamental level, all of us can identify with all the challenges that different women face. Two of the organizations that I'm involved in, from the business space and just creating voices for women and getting access to the bank, one of them is the Women Economic Assembly, and it was set up to tackle that minimum 40% that is set aside for women in business. And even the minimum 40%, I mean, there's 50% plus of us working, but they've set aside minimum 40%, but that's besides the point. Also, the Business Women's Association. So there are these pockets where we are trying to come together as a collective voice, as women in business, trying to push the door together. But if we don't identify the fact that the struggles that we face are beyond just business, beyond GBV, it's all our struggle as women, and none of us are better for it if we don't come together. It becomes a serious challenge. When we look at GBV, we do a good job of coming together, but again, in terms of what, I'm sorry, Nsako not Nsako, the lady on the line.
Kilebogile.
Kilebogile, apologies. If we only just talk about we don't want this to happen to us. But we don't put in systems in place to hold people accountable, to put pressure on people going behind bars, to put pressure on me getting this minimum 40%. We're all just going to be toy-toying for the fun of it. We're all just going to be meeting as women, having tea parties, and again next year we're still talking about the same thing. So I also challenge us to come together in the different spaces that we come together in, whether you're in the wellness space and you're trying to ensure that, mental health is something that is communicated about, or in the business space, or in the media space, whatever spaces we are playing an advocacy role in, let us make sure we hold ourselves and the people that we are advocating to accountable, so that we're not having the same conversation over and over again. The difference now is that we may not all march to the union buildings because there isn't this one cause we are fighting for. But in the different causes that we are fighting for, we really need to stop talking and rise up and act.
I think the other thing is also that our lives are defined by more than being women. Because if you think about the landless people's movements, led by a lot of women, if you think about environmental issues, led by women, we lead on many, many issues. To say, why aren't we coming together to galvanize, assumes that we would only galvanize on an issue that affects us because we say on this particular part of our identities. Women are carrying the ground. And in terms of movements that are bringing real change in the world, women are... It would really be a misnomer to say that women are not galvanizing society and leading. But because we are women and we have to be more than just our gender, our agendas are far broader. And so when I'm talking about environmentalism, gender issues are part of that, of that conversation. When I'm talking about ESCOM, gender issues are part of, so our gender is not removed from the rest of the social conversations that we are completely part of and leading.
Ladies, you've definitely given us a lot to mull over in the first hour of the show. We are in conversation for the annual SAfm Women's Month Dialogue. At this point, I think we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back on the other side of this and let's get into that gender pay gap. I know we've got a lot of opinions on that, considering the fact that also majority of our panelists are in the creative sector, and this is oftentimes a sector that is not brought into that particular conversation. So it'd be interesting to hear their perspective on that. You can track the conversation on our live stream and, of course, on our social media platforms at SAfm Radio. You can also find me on @BridgetMasinga, #TheFullCircle.
Long COVID is real. Lacking energy, feeling sick, always tired, and not just one thing, but a range of symptoms that can continue for weeks, even months. Getting vaccinated reduces the risk of suffering from severe illness as well as long COVID. Good reason to still go and get vaccinated and boosted. Want to know more? Call the National Health Hotline on 0800 029 999 or WhatsApp HELP to 0600 123 456.
Open up to pure and simple joys on the Insider SA this Monday evening at 6 as we're on the beach in Mozambique with Pearl Tusi and her daughter Tandoluthu Mukwena. New Miss South Africa and fashion entrepreneur Natasha Hubert shares the beauty in being business-minded.
As Miss South Africa, my message would be bold, be resilient. You're never too young to accomplish anything in life.
And media personality Pam Mdanga discovers simple food, fashion and music. That's the Insider SA this Monday at 6. Repeat Saturday at 1 p.m. on S3.
You're listening to Bridget Masinga on SAfm.
It is the full circle. Let me see. Looking at the time, I thought we'd go straight into the news, but we still have a few minutes to sort of play around with. Of course, you can always share your opinions with us on social media at SAfm Radio is where you'll find us on Twitter. And of course, you can also copy me at Bridget Masinga on Twitter as well. #TheFullCircle. It is the annual Women's Month SAfm Dialogue, and I am in conversation this afternoon with a panel of young thought leaders. These are women disrupting their respective spaces. We've we've got Mandisa Nkwanyana joining me, founder of Rubik's Media, as well as Gilebogile Muloko, who is the founder and chief and investment officer at Prowess Investment. Also joining me, Kopano Cohen. She's no stranger to the show. She's a television executive and a media personality, and Nzako Mkabela, a theater writer, producer, and a director. Just looking at the time, I think maybe let's go into a quick break and get into the news with Dineo Mutawung at the top of the hour, and then we'll come back on the other side of this and continue our conversation. I am quite intrigued to hear what the ladies have to say about this gender pay gap and some of the strides that may or may not be made in South Africa. I don't know. We'll also share a global perspective as to where women lie in this particular conversation. That's coming up on the other side of this.
Every fight gets us closer to the equality and freedom of women. The march to the union buildings was just the beginning. The fight against oppression of women continues. Let's carry the torch forward. Women's Month on SAfm. SAfm supports a litter-free South Africa. Play your part in keeping our surroundings and environment clean. SAfm, leading the conversation.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 106.6 FM in Bloemfontein.
Every fight gets us closer to the equality and freedom of women. The march to the union buildings was just the beginning. The fight against oppression of women continues. Let's carry the torch forward. Women's Month on SAfm.
1, 2, 1, 2.
And impartial. This is SAfm News.
Top stories. NPA to continue with the probe into Babita Deokaran murder case, and SA looking to strengthen trade ties with China. Good afternoon. With the news, I am Dineo Mutawung. The NPA says they will continue working on the Babita Deokaran case in order to nab the kingpin that ordered the hit on the life of the corruption whistleblower. 6 men have been convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms in the High Court in Johannesburg. All 6 received sentences ranging from 6 to 22 years for their involvement in her murder. They faced charges of murder, attempted murder, and possession of illegal firearms. Deokaran was gunned down outside her home in Winchester Hill, south of Johannesburg, in August 2021. NPA spokesperson Pindi Mjonondwane.
They all received sentences ranging from 6 years up until to 22 years. This is after they entered into a plea and sentence agreement with the NPA. Of course, as the NPA, we had to ensure that we follow due processes. The accused before court were sentenced to a lesser sentence than the prescribed minimum sentence of life imprisonment. The court obviously took into consideration that they pleaded guilty. They didn't waste the court's time. They also handed over information to the state that we can work on in order to get to the bottom of this case.
In a separate court matter, the family of murdered Bond University student Lee Matthews says they don't believe her killer, Donovan Moodley, has been rehabilitated. They were speaking through their legal team in the High Court in Johannesburg, where Moodley's parole review application was postponed to the end of this month. Moodley was convicted and sentenced for the abduction and murder of Matthews in 2004. He held her captive while demanding ransom money from her family. Moodley was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder, 15 years for kidnapping, and 10 years for extortion. Attorney for the Matthews family, Tanya Kuhn.
It's not that the Matthews family is saying that he shouldn't get parole. The Matthews family admits and accepts that any offender is entitled to be considered for parole, but what they are saying is that there are certain requirements that have to be met. And in this instance, there are still many unanswered questions. They don't feel he's been rehabilitated, and therefore they feel his profile should reflect what the true situation is, because there are issues regarding his profile which is not on record.
And in other news, President Cyril Ramaphosa has vowed to use the Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to the country to level two-way trade between the two countries. Currently, there's a huge trade deficit between South Africa and China, which is heavily skewed in favor of Beijing. But speaking during his meeting with President Xi, President Ramaphosa says the trade had multiplied many folds in the last 25 years of diplomatic and trade relations between the two sister republics. He says they now have to work hard to level their bilateral trade.
The question that stands out is what instrument or criteria used to fix the shortlisted candidates to only 8. Secondly, which instrument or criteria used to single out other candidates without following the necessary audits. I therefore challenge the process because of the obvious lack of transparency and rationality. I therefore propose that the process of shortlisting must start de novo.
Apologies for that sound. Here is President Ramaphosa.
South Africa is also China's biggest trading partner in Africa and an important destination for Chinese investment in Africa. Our bilateral trade has grown exponentially from less than 1 billion rand in 1998 to over 614 billion rand in 2022. As South Africa, we would like to see the significant trade deficit narrowed, and this visit is an opportunity for us to look at ways to do so.
And lastly, in the Western Cape, the City of Cape Town's Water and Sanitation Directorate is investigating the cause of 2 separate sewer collapses which resulted in huge sinkholes in Lavender Hill and Milnerton. Yesterday, a refuse truck fell into a sinkhole in Lavender Hill. The city's mayoral committee member for water and sanitation, Zahid Badruddin, says there was no visible sign of damage on the road surface before a section of the road gave way. The city's teams were also called out to another sinkhole in Montague Drive, Milnerton. Badruddin says contractors are busy with assessments of both incidents to determine the extent of damage before the work can be done. He's urging residents to stay away from both sides for safety reasons. Recapping the top story this hour, the NPA says they'll continue working on the Babita Deokaran case in order to nab the kingpin that ordered the hit of the life of the corruption whistleblower. Headlines at 2:30 for SAfm News. I'm Dino Mataung.
SAfm 104 to 107 nationwide.
Eskom understands that electricity is an integral part of running a business. However, electricity demand is currently higher than supply, and energy efficiency is critical. Businesses are encouraged to reduce consumption between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. by not leaving electrical equipment on standby mode, as well as turning off unnecessary lighting. We can reduce load shedding by working together. Every kilowatt counts.
Ladysmith Black Mambazo picking up their 5th Grammy Award.
A songbird, legend, all-time music visionary. Celebrating Dr. Joseph Shabalala. Tune in to Music is My Life, Dr. Joseph Shabalala and Ladysmith Black Mambazo documentary. Monday, 28 August at 9 p.m. only on SABC 1. Mzansi for sure. Bridget Masinga on SAfm. Bridget Masinga is leading the conversation all across South Africa right now. Stay tuned to SAfm. listening to Bridget Masinga on SAfm.
It is indeed the full circle with myself, Bridget Masinga, on SAfm. As we continue with our dialogue this afternoon, we are joined by women entrepreneurs, business and thought leaders joining us in conversation for the show today. And if you are tracking us on our live stream, then you do see that Maineleng Mapege has joined me, who's the MD of Mapege Attorneys. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It's only but a pleasure. And I think, for the second half of the show, we're definitely going to focus on the gender pay gap. And I know that, Kilebogile, I've got to let you go in a matter of moments. But maybe let's start with you then in this particular instance. And let's look at where South Africa stands in terms of the gender parities in the country.
We fared dismally, just to be direct. I think World Economic Forum they published their 2022 Global Gender Gap Report, and just in terms of pay parity, we ranked 111 out of 146. And I think the pay gap parity or differences range from 23% to 35%, depending on industry or whether private or public sector. So that's still very huge. I mean, inside some of the sectors, you find that maybe it's a little bit less than that, but even if it's less, we're talking maybe around 18% in certain key positions. So that's still it's dismal. And I think it's something that, we need to focus a lot of attention on. If you remember, my starting point was that some of the issues that we have as women in terms of gender gaps can actually be resolved if we are financially free or empowered to finance ourselves, either, to go to university, to learn more education, to provide for ourselves in terms of healthcare services, to provide for our children and families. As usually you would find that women in Africa are the breadwinners, in many societies. I remember when I started the industry, I came from banking, having had 2 years experience, and I got into investment, into asset management. And the company that I was going into didn't even negotiate my salary. And I think it was a 5 or 10% pay rise, and I was very excited. And later on, I realized that I think I am getting paid peanuts relative to my male counterparts, but also relative to maybe Caucasian or white colleagues. And the only way that I was able to unearth what my value is when other companies started offering me, job opportunities, where I realized that I was actually being paid maybe 40 to 60% below where the market was as a skilled investment professional. And over time, you realize, especially for certain industries, that even in our industry, you are discouraged in terms of disclosing how much you pay, right? So I can tell Cheryl or Richard or whatever that I'm being paid maybe 200,000 per annum. So that also, the opacity of what are the levels of pay for different roles exacerbates the problem, because then we can't then ascertain how big a problem the pay gap is. And I think that's where transparency comes through in terms of really in the corporate sector or corporate South Africa, where we can actually start having surveys done for different roles, and we can really start seeing what the pay gap differences are, and then also be intentional in terms of business strategy or regulation or legislation, just in terms of moving towards a point where we can actually reduce the pay gap parities.
Kilebogile, I think at this point, let me say thank you so much for joining our conversation this afternoon. Much appreciated, and a happy Women's Month to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. That's the thing, right? I think, and for the bulk now, everyone that's here is in some form or another in the creative sector. In one capacity, whether in a legal perspective, whether in a position of, power and authority, driving brands. But the thing that I always find interesting is what Gilebogile alluded to as well, is the transparency of it all. So we talk around, gender pay gaps, what does that look like? But we never really have these honest conversations about, let's compare. You bring your contract, I bring mine, and let's compare and gauge what's on the paper so that we can have an informed conversation where we use ourselves as literal and practical examples. Let me jump you in here, Mainaleng.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that, having looked at a lot of contracts with different people, both male and men and women, is that you find that the woman's contract, the fee or the rate is generally lower than that of their male counterparts, even though the woman is doing significantly better than what her male counterparts are doing. And the whole reason of, confidentiality and transparency, particularly for things like payment, is to ensure that there's no benchmark that you can kind of gauge how much you're getting paid against. So it's easier to just say, no, the contracts are different. And if you do ask, then it's a question of, no, this one has a bit more popularity and more experience than you. They've been doing this a bit longer. And when we look at the numbers and we look at radio monitoring and all of that, the male counterpart seems to have a bigger audience. Hence, we're not paying you the same, even though you're on the same show. So you're just like, what? That doesn't even make sense. So for the most part, it's really definitely, I think, just a way of keeping us as women, generally below. I mean, I think it's the patriarchy, without using those words. But I think the patriarchy of it plays such a big role in always trying to keep the woman subservient and submissive and less than, so that, the male is always seen at a higher level, and that speaks to pay, that speaks to, even support, that women generally don't have more support in the workplace than their male counterparts.
Don't worry, by the way, that word patriarchy has been thrown around here this afternoon quite freely. So,
Noted. I'm in good company.
You are in a stellar company this afternoon. But and it's interesting that you use radio as an example, right? And sometimes when we share our experiences and perspectives, I think, Bridget, shut your big beak, because you might get yourself into trouble. I remember sending quite the email, and at the time, my heads of station said, in all the years that we've been in radio, we've never received this email. And we can see from the contents of it that you've been talking to your colleagues, and you did a comparative thing. And I said, well, what is causing you to frown? Is it that I'm sort of shaking up this whole notion of confidentiality and privacy, or I'm questioning things based on real, tangible evidence? Like, I'm asking you, how are you weighing my value in sort of contrast to someone else? Because also, and I've been a big proponent and advocate of this, I feel in these sectors, there should be a base point. There should be a starting base. Like in every corporate sector has it. If you are executive at this level, this is where it starts, and then we factor in all the other things. Doesn't happen so much in the creative sector.
It definitely doesn't. But, the whole thing about confidentiality is really funny, because it's been used almost as a weapon in these scenarios to say, should you raise your hand and say, I know this? Oh, you've been talking to so-and-so. You've been talking to Ntsako. You and Ntsako are forming some strange alliance. Management doesn't like that. That vilifying of these conversations, really, I never understood. And I think it's one of the problems I've had working in corporate. I don't think I'll ever do that again. Is that you have these sort of issues and weaponization of things that in a contract you sign, probably not even really understanding the impact, and then you get vilified for being honest, right? But in our industry in particular, I had a conversation with a friend about rate cards. And we have them. We all, a DOP costs 200 Rand a day. Definitely not 200 Rand a day, but that kind of thing. and it goes up with experience, right? But the problem that I have with that, especially if you look at sort of the servicing industry, larger productions, international companies coming into big studios in Cape Town, et cetera, is that people will say, well, you don't have the experience, but people aren't giving you the time or giving you the chance to gain the experience. And you end up in this weird mid, and then people say, oh, that person is a cameraman for studio. You don't want to be a studio cameraman, but that's what producers have put you. And people get compartmentalized in these weird boxes because the rate card issue hasn't been resolved. And, you know, the OTT services are here, the big guys are here, paying budgets that the local broadcasters cannot pay, right? And asking the questions, but why are you not paying this person more? You know, furthermore, I was in a conversation the other day where they were like, oh, there aren't enough people in your team. We as South African producers are used to carrying the baby, the bathwater, everything, you don't sleep, right? And the way that creatives get treated is so different on an international basis, and we hope it proliferates into the local market and how they treat producers. But really the issue about basics, what do you pay a basic, is really important. Just because you can make a saving on a line item as a producer, there are bigger conversations you should be thinking about, because what am I saying to the younger people, and why would Zanele, who can do the work, get paid less than Bridget just because I can? You know.
Ladies, and take a quick break, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation.
Get ready to make your life easier with TV License's new website features. We upgraded to the secure iVery 3D payment gateway and the ability to manage your account information, view, print, and download a detailed TV license statement. You can make website queries for an account and technical support, which has made things immensely easier. It is now a smooth, effortless process that can respond to all user inquiries quickly and efficiently. It is a great way to quickly get the help you need without worrying about a thing. Get started now and enjoy the convenience of TV License's new website features. Visit www.tvlic.co.za today. TV Licenses, do it for the convenience that matter.
South Africa, our story is your story because Ashupor was born out of the desire to serve those who serve, to serve the everyday men and women who work hard to build this country from the ground up. You can trust Ashupor to serve you because Ashupor was there for your elders, is here for you today, and will be there for your family tomorrow. SMS serve to 44366 and we'll call you back. Ashupor, 110 years of serving those who serve. Ashupor Life, an insurer licensed to conduct life insurance business, an authorized financial services provider. FSP 53. T's and C's apply.
Remembering how they lost their Premier League title last season, the Gunners of London want to grab more points this time around.
Saka! Oh, what a goal! Bukayo Saka with an absolute gem!
But the Cottagers are not in the business of donating points.
Pereira crossfeed. Yes! Cordova-Reid is there. It's 1-0 to Fulham.
Catch the superb Premier League clash between Arsenal and Fulham on Saturday 26 August at 3 p.m. live on S3. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
You're listening to Bridget Masinga on SAfm.
It is the Full Circle on SAfm leading the conversation as we wind down on Women's Month with our Women's Month dialogue. And I'm joined, of course, for this conversation by Nzako Mkabela, who is a theater practitioner, a writer, a director, producer. And alongside her is Mainaleng Mapeka, who is the MD of Mapeka Attorneys. And they are a bespoke firm that actually focalizes and specializes in entertainment law. Also, Kopano Cohen joins me. She's a television executive and content generator, and Mandisa Nkwanyana, who is the founder of Rubik's Media, also in the entertainment and marketing space. And we were talking in this hour around, you know, the gender pay gap. And as we were going to the break, Kopano pointed out something that I thought, it's for me, it's an interesting thing because it speaks to psychology and emotion. It is this notion of, divide and conquer, this notion of oppressing or suppressing by not really recognizing or acknowledging your worth. And it's not something that is exclusive to our sectors, the CCIs. It's something that women in corporate South Africa speak about as well. This whole my worth and my contribution is not recognized. It's not acknowledged, and in ways that matter. And some of them are financial and some of them aren't. Particularly so if you are a black woman, you are really at the bottom of the pecking order.
I think for me, just on, and I want to go back to the history of how we got to this position where there's this huge pay gap. One, industries were always male-driven, right? And in the past, the men were seen as the breadwinner, the provider. I was home with the children, so he had to get a bigger bag because he's taking care of me and the family. The challenge is that when women started getting into the workplace, the mindsets, the way things were done were still not changed, because the assumption is that I'm going to get married and someone is still going to take care of me. The challenge that we have in South Africa, most of us are I am in a single parent household, but there's a majority of women that are single women taking care of the children. But no one thinks that I need the same bag as the man. And the systems that keep the door closed don't want us to tap into that, because one, we're rattling on people's cages that they've been happily living in for 50 plus years. We're rattling on pushing the idea of equity, equality, which is something where, let's be honest, we are not seen as equal in most spaces. So we need to really pull the lid and open up and see what's happening on the inside. When I left agency world and call it corporate South Africa to start my own business, the biggest challenge that I had, the first day I walked into that agency, there was myself and a young Afrikaans boy, same age, same qualifications, same number of years of experience. But the day I saw his salary by the photocopy machine, it took the wind out of my chest, because it actually doesn't make sense. But the assumption is that he has a wife, he's got kids, he needs to take care of stuff. Well, I have to take care of stuff too. So on the basis of equality, we've got the same qualifications, we've got all these things that are the same. There shouldn't be a reason why we are not getting the same pay for the same work. But if we don't have systems where this is transparent, where people are penalized for treating women differently when it comes to monetary value and payment, we're still going to be in the same situation. So I think thinking about the way we approach women in the workspace as leaders, and understanding that there are bigger dynamics that don't apply to 50 years ago. Things are different now. Women are the leaders of their home. They are the main providers. How do we make sure that they are able to take care of the same community that you assume men are taking care of? That's the one for me.
Yeah. I'll just add something there. Sorry, Bridget. You know, when you speak about having children, it's actually a disadvantage that you do have children as a black woman in corporate, because you're not supposed to have children. If you've got children, you're a stumbling block. You're going to complain. You want equal pay, but you want to leave early because you need to take your child to the doctor. And like you're saying, with men, they've already got the support structure, and that the assumption is you've already got a wife, and your wife is the one who will leave the office to go home and take care of kids. So now when you're negotiating, and that's even if you have that, that leverage to negotiate, you're not going to get any extra cent in, because the assumption is already she's got kids, she's going to leave at some point, or she's going to want to have kids if she doesn't have the kids. So we don't want to plow too much in her, pay her too much, invest too much in her, for her to then leave in 2 years because now she's got a child, and then we must pay maternity leave, and then so it's almost a disadvantage being a black woman or a woman in general within corporate and working spaces.
Ladies, let's hold it there. We'll come back and carry on this conversation. It is approaching 2:30. I think Daneo is standing by with the headline news.
Thank you, Bridget. Good afternoon. Let's take a look at the headlines at 2:30. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana has sought to clarify the country's position on the dollar ahead of the start of the BRICS summit in Sandton this afternoon. In other news, the NPA says they'll continue working on the Babita Deokaran case in order to nab the kingpin that ordered the hit on the life of the corruption whistleblower. And EFF Member of Parliament Umphile Mautwe has objected to the shortlisting of acting public protector Koleka Kalega for the position of the new public protector. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
Tweet at SAfm Radio and at Bridget Masinga.
It is the Full Circle leading the conversation on SAfm. By the way, our WhatsApp line is open. So if you do want to chime in with your voice notes, you absolutely can do so on 061-410-4107. That is the usual line that we utilize on WhatsApp if you want to be a part of this afternoon's dialogue. And of course, if you're live streaming, then you can see that we are multitasking here as well as we try and keep our eye on the clock and keep the conversation going. So if you are seeing me not really active on Twitter today, you know why. But you can always send through your comments there as well. At Bridget Masinga is the handle in which you can find me. So more than 51%, by the way, of the South African population is female. And of that, it is 2/3 that are single parents, single-parented households. And we reiterate this conversation all the time because sometimes I think to conscientize people of we are not an anomaly. As we sit here, 5 women, I'm the only one without a child. And you, Meineling. So the statistic feeds into this very small sample as well. So to say then that you cannot invest in women and you cannot invest particularly in black women in a majority black country, that says something about you. Yes, go ahead, Nzako.
You know, if you look at, let's say, the fiscus and what we spend on, and you look at the amount we spend, say, on education, if you're not going to make sure that women can take care of their families, make sure that we raise thriving, capable individuals, you're wasting your spend on education. Because if you were to make sure that women are paid properly, that families are balanced, that people feel supported where they should be, part of why you need to spend so much on education is because there's nobody home to help with homework at home. And if our lives are so imbalanced, you're going to continue to think, no, let's put the money there. No, put the money at the place where it can make the biggest difference. And really that is in the hands of women. I mean, they keep saying if you educate a woman, you would educate a village, right? It's really not like your grandmother is saying. It is truth. Because the money, I mean, anytime you put money into a family, your money goes into like curtains. How many times, when was the last time a man thought, you know, we need to buy new curtains for this house? Our money goes into things that are, I know people think, oh, you know, women get paid too much, they'll do their nails and buy shoes. No, I know the last time somebody bought skirpot. Nobody knows who buys that thing that washes the pot. And we do. And that's really, the majority of our money goes into reproducing our homes and society. It goes into helping the elderly. It goes into making sure that the families that can't cope on the grant then make it through the rest of the month. So when you're looking at also not just what women get paid, but where their money goes, you then say, actually, if women were to get paid better, we would have to spend less on social spending as a country. We would have to spend less on education, on healthcare, etc., etc. We would have to spend less on hospitals that are growing, because if we were getting paid fairly, we wouldn't work ourselves to the death where we actually need to go to hospitals and so on. And I think it's really important. It's not just a patriarchal thing, it's an ethical thing.
Yeah.
Anytime you're a leader and you are paying women less and you cannot justify why, and I mean really properly, you are an unethical person. You are an unethical leader, and we shouldn't talk about, you know, when you say pay gap, it sounds really clean. What it means is that you take women's effort and you intentionally pay them less because you can get away with it. That kind of thing, we need to just call out and say, if you have a company that does this, this is, no matter how green you are, no matter how rainbow you are, no matter how hip with the blacks you are, for as long as women get paid less, you are still unethical.
Sorry, I want to jump in just before. Our industry in particular, I want to talk about production. People can come into your production house and produce a show for years and years and years, but the policies around maternity are so shocking, it will scare you. And then the same women who are running these organizations are not advocating for 30-year-old pregnant Sibongile. They send her away. I've been in conversations in companies I've worked for where I was the only one going, well, why would we send Sibongile away? Well, she's not going to be producing, will she? And I think the TV industry at large, we as producers, the old producers, I'm 40 now, so I'm going to call myself old. If we're not advocating and fighting for such basic things, we were just saying now, nobody wants to be pregnant, Bridget. It's terrible. It's terrible. We don't want to be overweight. We don't want to be those people. But what is the other way that we bring children into the family? Someone help us. Make that machine grow. We go and use it. Yeah. But we are the ones who have to have the children. And then you have female producers and EPs saying, nah, Smo won't be here. We won't extend her contract while she's pregnant. On the daily, this happens. On the daily. So,
as you ladies are talking, my eyes are downcast because I'm recalling some of my own internal conversations. As you get to a particular age and stage as a woman in entertainment, as a freelancer, you have to mitigate against certain things. When you start thinking about starting a family, you have to go, oh, darn, I need to be off air for 3 to 4 months. So which means I need a lead-up time of a year in order to work to cover that 3 to 4 months. Because while I'm off being a mother, I'm not invoicing anybody. It's on you. In fact, you're answering the questions of, when are you going to be back? When are you coming back? Like, how long is this going to take? And then I'm also thinking of something that really disturbed me. There's an actress, Michelle Williams. A lot of people know Michelle Williams. There's a story that came out, I think about a year or so ago. She was working on a project. And if you filmed anything or you know about how film works, pickups. Once you are done and you wrapped and then you need to pick up certain scenes. She got paid a meager, I think it was 1,000 rand. I remember saving that clip on Instagram where she spoke about it on a television interview. She got paid something meager like $1,000 for pickups. There was no room for negotiation. This is her time, this is her energy, this is her effort. Her male counterpart got paid $2 million for the exact same thing. The exact same number of days, the exact same scenes, the exact same thing.
Implication, right? What if in the time that Michelle, between shooting and pickups, got pregnant, could she do her pickups with a belly? Let's add a complication to that because now she's on screen, right? Yeah. You're out there, you can't hide the pregnancy. How many actresses probably fell prey to this thing where now you have to come in for pickups, but you're showing? Right? You're bumping. You can't hide that bump. The lives of women on screen and on camera it's about your looks. And pregnancy disrupts that whole thing. And the struggles of women on camera while pregnant is something we can talk about ad nauseum.
Bridget, when they say, when are you coming back?
Yeah.
They want you now back. They don't want the you that is evolved, changed, grown by the experience of having your child. They don't want it to show physically. They don't want it to show emotionally in how you speak, what you speak about. So even when we have children, we have to have this process of erasure where you must get your breasts looking 18 again. And you say, but how? And where your belly must look as though it never carried a child. So I think these processes of wanting women to bear the burden of reproducing society, but also be able to completely erase it from their personalities. Where if you talk about your child, they'll say, oh, you're talking about your child again. And yet if you don't talk about your child, they'll say, you're really disconnected. It's like you're not bonding with your child enough. Are you being a good mother? So it's all of these things where each side of the coin, women pay for this. And I think that companies saying, well, we're going to have to pay somebody else to replace you, when women are in the workplace, we work harder than everybody else. We usually may have to leave an hour earlier, but we will make up a lot more time. If you look at productivity that comes from women, especially black women, we're more educated, more trained, more productive, and yet punished over and over again.
Ladies, let's pause there. Mainaleng, when I come back, I'm going to come back straight to you. It is the full circle with myself, Bridget Masinga.
Guess who's back? Yes, Roughing It Out is back for season 7 on SABC2. Whether you're in it for the mountains, the rivers, the animals, the awesome presenters, or the determined kids, if you think you can handle all of the action, the adrenaline, the drama, the suspense, and if you want to rough it out too, then join us every Wednesday afternoon at 4 p.m. on SABC2. SABC Education, enriching minds, enriching lives.
Open up to pure and simple joys on the Inside SA this Monday evening at 6 as we're on the beach in Mozambique with Pearl Tusi and her daughter Tandolwethu Mokoena. New Miss South Africa and fashion entrepreneur Natasha Hubert shares the beauty in being business-minded.
As Miss South Africa, my message would be bold, be resilient. You're never too young to accomplish anything in life.
And media personality Pam Mdanga discovers simple food, fashion and music. That's the Insider SA this Monday at 6. Repeat Saturday at 1 p.m. on S3.
Join SAfm for its first University Debate Challenge for 2023 on Friday, the 25th of August. The 1-hour debate will take place on This Week Today with Oliver Dixon from 6 to 7 p.m. at the SABC Durban M1 studio. The station will kickstart the campaign in KZN with the University of KwaZulu-Natal and University of Zululand students. The SAfm University Debate Challenge is an independent, non-partisan, progressive initiative seeking to develop confident communicators, critical thinkers, and empowered global citizens and leaders of today and tomorrow. To participate in the debate, please contact SAfm on 011 714 2765 or email chimelwane@sabc.co.za. SAfm, leading the conversation.
It is the full circle, and of course, we are in conversation for Women's Month. But before we do that, just by way of a reminder, if you stay in the Western Cape, in Limpopo, Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga, or KwaZulu-Natal, from the 1st of August this year, you will not be, by the way, receiving SABC TV programs on the analog platform, but you can still enjoy your favorite TV programs on DTT and, of course, on SABC Plus and other digital platforms. And this is part of the digital migration. So if you check via your post office, or you can call 0860 736 832 or WhatsApp on 0600 625458 for more information in order to check whether or not you actually qualify for government's subsidy. Alrighty, we're still in conversation for Women's Month. It is the full circle with myself, Bridget Masinga, on SAfm, leading the conversation. And I wanted to throw to you, Mainaleng, because I mean, you in law, and you deal with the creative sector on a day-to-day basis. Is it a case of us not being completely conscious of our rights, of the legalities around particular things, that we often find ourselves on the back foot and being victimized in so many ways?
I don't think it's not knowing. It's more fear-based. You're scared that if you want to speak up and voice your opinion, that you will be blackballed. You're scared that you will be victimized. You're scared that you won't get another job. You know, even as you know, DJs in the club space, as performers, women who are performers, you see the difference with how much their male counterparts earn. But the minute they vocalize it and become a bit more vocal, then you're a comrade. You know, you're labeled things instead of actually taking that information, digesting on it and saying, look, we have to do better, we need to do different. And I think you were saying, Zako, about how, you know, women carry most of the work and end up carrying everyone else's slack. You know, I worked at a law firm where the director was very clear that he did not hire any men because he said men don't work, and only hired women because he said women are good workers across the board, but our male colleagues don't work. But, but for some people, and I mean, I guess in that instance, we all knew how much we're all earning. We all earn the same. The base is the same. So there's nobody who's sitting there and arguing. I guess we're also lawyers. So we're just like, why am I earning this, at a law firm? But, if we were in an environment where I've worked in corporate, in-house, where we're in an environment where I don't know how much my male counterpart is earning because I'm not supposed to know. But in a law firm space, a lot of people generally would earn the same because the benchmarks are kind of there. So I must say, to a certain extent, the legal fraternity is a bit more friendlier because we all know. We know how much the base, we know once you get to senior associate, what a senior associate is earning, what a director is earning. But, the only issue is always at like the candidate level where it differs from people to people. But generally, women are also fearful, like we're talking about the snapback culture, that, you are pregnant, you're a female performer, you need to get back on stage. You're scared to be pregnant and to be out of the loop for more than 3 months, because if you do that, somebody else is coming to take your place. And it's vocalized that if you fall pregnant now, your career is on its upward trajectory. If you fall pregnant, you're going to suffer the same fate that some of the people that came before you suffered. And we've seen it. I mean, I don't want to mention people's names, but I've seen where somebody's trajectory is on the up and up. They're doing international tours. They're gigging all over the world. And the minute they fall pregnant, it's almost like an indictment to who they are, and all the work that they've done is erased.
Yeah. It's so interesting. My eyes are always wondering, as we're having this conversation, I'm seeing a BRICS delegation walking into walking into the building. And I wonder, given the context of what's happening in South Africa right now, I saw our respective minister, Zizi, there this morning with his colorful shirt. But I wonder, these conversations, do they happen at deeper levels? Do these conversations about how do we support, recognize, and show value to women in the creative industries happen at levels beyond our little... Everyone's shaking their heads. And Nsako's looking at me going, Bridget, wishful thinking.
I just add that, I'm part of Women in Music South Africa, so it's an organization where our sole job is to punt for women. We're trying to put women on. We're trying to ensure that across the board there's equality, there's the equity, there's networking, there's safe spaces so that these conversations can happen. The conversations happen at this level. We have the conversations. The minute we approach our male counterparts, I mean, I remember sitting someone who's an ally of Women in Music. We sat there with him, met with him, spoke to him about, what they can do as an organization to help us. And everything was an excuse that came back to, but you guys as girls as well, you're also not going to you're not going to sit there and be one of the guys. It's like, I'm not a guy. Of course I'm not going to sit there and be one of the guys. And once you try have those conversations, then it's uncomfortable. And I say to you, if I'm coming to the studio to record a song, and it's a studio filled with 10 men, and I'm the only woman there, it's uncomfortable for me as a woman, because I can assure you that at least 3 of those 10 people are going to try something.
Yeah.
And if you say no, then you're so uptight, or you're not down, or she's so boring, you're bringing the energy of the studio session down. It becomes all these things. Then there's elements of drinking. There's so many different elements that then contribute to where it makes people a bit more unhinged, because once you're drunk, their inhibitions and whatever they would have, the filter that they would have had suddenly disappears. So even if you're trying to have the conversations with the right people, they still sit in positions where ultimately they are men, and they still have to protect themselves and each other, because at one point he's scared that maybe I've done something that somebody might say, well, actually, you also acted inappropriately. So why are you actually sitting here on stage and being an ally when you're a problem yourself? So the conversations don't happen. They're too scared to have the conversations.
I want to pick up, yes, Mandisa, I promise, I just want to pick up on what you just said, Minaling. One of the boys. Yabona, that phrase. And you're right in saying we are not one of the boys. And we had a conversation about 2 weeks ago with I forget her designation now, but we were talking around females' participation in the military, for instance, in combat roles coming into the forefront. And she put it so succinctly when she said, Bridget, perhaps part of our conversations is not looking at gender equality, but looking at gender equity and recognizing that my soft skills have the same kind of value as your physical skills. So in the context of being one of the boys, no, I'm not one of the boys, and I'll never relate to you as one of the boys or conduct myself as one of the boys, because I also don't bring what the boys bring, but it's of the same value as the boys.
And I think you touched on a very important point, that one, we are not the same. I'll say it boldly, we are not equal. We are not, in many ways as possible. Even if, the transgender movement thinks they can call themselves women, we are not equal from a physiological sense, from the way we were created. But in the conversation of equity, how then do we have the conversation? And I want to touch on what my Naleng said. Askisa Mzulu, allyship is for me, it's a bit of an interesting conversation, right? There are allies that are pro the women's movement, pro the women's voice. But it's also how we also approach male spaces as women. I mean, I work in 2 organizations that are about women's empowerment, putting money in women's hands. But the approach can't come and say we're getting rid of all the men standing behind there. Industries will work better when we work together. I bring certain skill sets to the table, you bring others, and those can allow us to grow industry sectors in a more congruent and equal and fair way, if you will. In a conversation I have with a very close friend of mine, who's also a lady I do a lot of business with, we were talking about, in the spaces of going into contracting or business, is letting men know that I'm not here to take from you. I'm here to add to the conversation. I'm here to add a different perspective. I'm here to learn from you in as much as you can learn from me. But again, going back to the studio example you made, a few years ago, friends of mine in production in the creative industry, male friends, said to me, and it's something that has always remained in my mind, they said to me, if you are not in the room when the music video is being discussed, you will be on top of the car when the music video is being shot.
Sure.
So it's very important to find ourselves in spaces where we are part of the conversation, we are part of the work happening, and there are men who are willing to let us in. We can't obviously take away the fact that other people may take advantage, and that's where we need to protect ourselves. We can't take away the fact that other people won't let us in because, you know what, in his house, his wife cleans, cooks, he doesn't do anything. He's patriarchal in his mindset, and he brings that to work with him. So we work with people that do certain things in their homes that won't suddenly, when he meets me at work, he sees an equal partner. I'm a woman just like, actually, according to him, I should be home with my children. Do you know what I mean? So those are things that even from a social construct point of view, conversations need to be had, and in terms of how do we jump over this hill together, because again, we can't do it on our own. At the same time, we also can't have this strong movement that is also just pro-young girls, because in 20 years' time, we're also going to have issues with a panel of boys saying, how do you let us in?
Ladies, just looking at the time now, and we're fast approaching the end of the show, and I'm thinking, let's just wrap up our conversation and then wrap up the afternoon from our end and throw it to Aldrin Sampear to take over. I'm unaware whether he's here or he's at Bricks, but I'm presuming that he's probably at Bricks. But by way of parting words, Kopano, your final pieces of nugget?
Yeah, so the one thing that I told myself I'm going to speak about coming onto this panel is the issue of mental health, women's mental health. We've touched on it in many respects, but quite often the gateway to a woman having a depressive episode is her child, and then it becomes a whole journey of mental health. Women get referred to as crazy, unstable, the gaslighting playbook every day, all over the world, in corporate and in creative spaces. And I really, as somebody who called myself a mental health advocate, want to really bring that to the fore, that there's nothing wrong with having a mental health issue, and we should create spaces where people can say, I'm feeling low today, I need a mental health day, without shaming them. And I feel like those conversations must happen more and more in line with the experience of women who've had children, who are carrying the whole community outside of their family, and we are dealing with so much that our mental health must be brought to the fore, and that's what I came here to say more than anything else.
Nsako, let me give you a moment, just a moment.
No, I just really think that it's important for people, in speaking about allyship, feminism, patriarchy, etc., we're essentially saying that human beings are equally, at least in the eye of whoever made us, and that treating women fairly, paying people for the work they do, recognizing how much they put into making sure that they carry everything. That is really a matter of ethics at this point. It is a matter of whether or not you are a good person or a bad person or a company and so on. It isn't even about politics anymore. Yes, it is about politics. Yes, it's about do we have numbers, etc., etc. But if you have a company, a space where you know, and people know, when you sign the document for my contract and his contract and they're different, you know. At that point of knowing, you must recognize that women are not crazy when they say we're paid differently, because you're the one that pays us differently. So really, this thing of making women feel crazy about the things we talk about has to end, because it really should be called out and called that I see myself equally to a man. A man must see himself equally to me. To ask me to see myself any other way is to ask me to dehumanize myself in a way I'm not willing to do. And I'm not willing to have another person dehumanize me in that way. So these are really the things about, is it men, is it women? No. God made me. And I expect to be treated as such, and I will treat you as such. That's it.
Ladies, we've fast come to the end of our conversation this afternoon, but let me take this time to thank you all for joining me. Truly appreciate it. I think for anybody that was listening to our chat, definitely walking away with an interesting perspective. And for us, it was important with my team to get in young, dynamic South African women, because as you sit here, you are the representation of the majority of South Africa's population. You are the representation of the voting demographic of South Africa, and of course the economic drivers of this country, not to mention the heads of single-parented households. And so your voice matters. Perhaps your voice matters even more so than the very handful of women who sit in upper echelon executive positions, who, quote unquote, have summited the mountaintop. It is very important for us to convene and for us to be heard and for us to be seen in very significant ways as those who hold the country upright, but also those who are getting to the summit of that mountain. Hallelujah to that. From myself and my team, it's been an honor and a privilege. Aldrin St. Pierre is standing by with Beyond the Headline. Not too sure if he's here or he's out at Bricks, but something tells me that he's probably in Sandton. We will see you tomorrow, inshallah, God willing.
Remembering how they lost their Premier League title last season, the Gunners of London want to grab more points this time around.
Saka! Oh, what a goal! Bukayo Saka with an absolute gem!
But the Cottagers are not in the business of donating points.
Pereira crossfeed. Cordova Reid is there. It's 1-0 to Fulham.
Catch the superb Premier League clash between Arsenal and Fulham on Saturday 26 August at 3 p.m. live on S3. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCsport.com. #WeLoveItHere. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the